Hot copper and cheap antiseptic choked the tiny room. I ripped the silver bullet from his chest. It hit the metal tray with a wet clink. Instantly, his golden eyes snapped open. The heavy steel deadbolts on my clinic doors slammed shut, locking from the inside. I didn't save a man. I just locked myself in a cage with a monster. Mine, the shadow growled. Chapter 1. Hot blood coated the stainless steel table. Quinn refused to blink, driving her latex-covered palms directly into the torn muscle of the man's shoulder. Sour beer, stale tobacco, and the sharp tang of sweat filled the cramped room. "Hold still," Quinn ordered, keeping her tone deadpan. Snagging a gauze pad, she scrubbed the red smear away and grabbed a curved needle. Overhead, fluorescent tubes buzzed and flickered, throwing jagged shadows across the concrete walls of her underground clinic. She took the bloody cash to keep her sister safe, making the grime worth it. "You got a hard hand, Doc," the wounded man grunted. "You caught a bullet," Quinn shot back. "Deal with it." She tied off the black thread, snapping the scissors shut. Done. The man dragged himself up, tossing a tight roll of stained bills onto her metal tray. The cash hit the tin with a dull smack. Dust motes danced in the harsh overhead light, while Quinn stared at the payment. "Lock your doors tight tonight," the man muttered, sliding his boots to the floor. "The vanguard is hunting." Quinn went completely rigid. She forced her shoulders to drop, burying the sudden spike of adrenaline. "I don't care about street gangs." "It's not a gang war," he said, coughing up a wet laugh. "It's a monster hunt. Word is, the Alpha got set up. His own pack pumped his back full of silver." The buzzing fluorescent light suddenly sounded deafening. "If that beast comes crawling down here, silver makes them crazy," the man warned. "He will rip you apart." He shoved the reinforced door open. Rain lashed against the concrete alleyway for a split second, before the metal slammed shut. Quinn stripped her gloves, high-tossing them into the biohazard bin. Bleach burned the back of her throat. She snatched her cracked phone from the counter. "Mia, studying for my big test. Safe in my room. Love you, Q." Relief crashed through Quinn's chest. She typed a quick reply. "Quinn, love you more. Keep the door locked." Dropping the phone, she yanked her bottom drawer open. Past the rolled bandages sat a strange glowing pendant she pulled from the gutters 3 days ago. Warmth radiated from the metal, humming directly against her bare fingertips. A violent crash rattled the brick walls. Glass rained down outside. In the sudden quiet, a guttural, terrifying scream ripped through the alley. Quinn snatched her pistol from the drawer, her knuckles turning white as wet scratching started at her back entrance.
2 miles away and tearing through the warehouse district, liquid fire chewed through Cade's veins. He crushed the leather steering wheel of his SUV, swerving wildly across the slick, rain-flooded asphalt. Thick, black blood bubbled up his throat, spilling over his chin as he coughed. Silver. A pure death sentence. His own guards had ambushed him, putting a slug straight into his spine. Pack bonds snapped inside his chest, tearing pieces of his soul away with every severed tie. A low, vibrating growl ripped past his teeth. He ruled the underground as the Vanguard Alpha, and they tossed him to the gutters. The toxic metal paralyzed his lower back, fighting his supernatural healing and winning. The bullet lodged deep, inching toward his heart. Cade slammed his boot on the gas, forcing the engine to roar. Traders owned his local clinics now, but he remembered a whisper about a ghost doctor, a human girl hiding in the basement levels who patched up strays. Bright headlights flared in his rearview mirror. 3 armored SUVs closed the gap, tires hydroplaning on the wet road. The hunters caught his scent. "Not tonight," Cade snarled. He cranked the wheel, sending the SUV spinning into a narrow, blacked-out alleyway. The bumper obliterated a row of trash cans, grinding sparks against the brick walls as the metal caved. Darkness edged into his vision. The trader's voice echoed in his ringing ears. The shadow wants you dead. With 0 brakes left, Cade aimed the ruined hood directly at the dead-end wall. He braced for impact. The collision shattered the windshield into flying ice. The airbag punched his face, instantly deflating in a cloud of white powder. Steam hissed from the crushed radiator. Rain drummed against the warped roof while a high-pitched ring drilled through Cade's skull. Every muscle locked in pure, agonizing paralysis. Then, the scent cut through the smoke. Bleach, stale copper, sharp human fear. Cade kicked the mangled door, snapping the hinges outright. He dragged his bleeding frame out into the freezing downpour, collapsing to his knees in the slick mud. Swallowing felt like eating crushed glass. Forcing his legs to work, he stumbled toward a faded red bulb glowing above a reinforced steel door. He slammed his fist against the metal. Nothing. Tires shrieked at the mouth of the alley. Doors popped open, dropping booted feet onto the flooded pavement. Cade threw his entire weight into the steel frame. The hinges buckled, groaning under the brutal force. Metal snapped. He spilled forward into the blinding fluorescent lights of the hidden clinic.
The exact moment the screaming outside stopped, Quinn's reinforced steel door tore completely off its hinges with a sickening crunch. She scrambled backward as the ruined slabs slammed onto her sterile white tiles. A colossal man crashed through the open frame. Broad shoulders and thick corded muscles strained against a shredded, soaked shirt. He hit the floor hard, chest heaving as pitch-black blood instantly pooled around his ribs. Quinn leveled her pistol directly at his skull, the metal grip rattling in her trembling hands. "Don't move," she yelled. "I will shoot you." The man ignored her, choking out a wet, hacking cough. Blood dripped steadily from his chin to the tile. Beneath the metallic tang of his open wounds, the room filled with the scent of crushed pine, violent storms, and burning ozone. Slowly he lifted his head. Quinn's breath hitched. Glowing, predatory gold eyes locked onto hers from the floor. The Vanguard Alpha. "Get out," Quinn whispered. Cade ground his teeth together, keeping his terrifying gaze pinned to her face. He reached a shaking hand toward his chest, clawing the ruined fabric away from his ribs. "Silver!" he choked out. Quinn stared at the mangled flesh. The surrounding skin turned pitch black, and literal grey smoke plumed off the burn. The metal cooked him from the inside. Footsteps splashed rapidly in the alleyway outside. Men shouted over the pouring rain, "Check the wrecked car! Find him!" If the hunters found him in her clinic, they would slaughter her too. The city cops belonged to the wolves. Dialing 911 meant certain death. She stared at her pistol, then down at the predator bleeding out on her floor. He wasn't attacking. He was dying. "Damn it!" Quinn cursed. Dropping the firearm, she dug the blast door remote from her scrub pocket and jammed her thumb into the red button. Thick security plates slammed down from the ceiling, sealing the doorway with a pressurized hiss. The clinic became a vault. Fists instantly pounded against the exterior steel. "Open up!" a muffled voice yelled. "Vanguard business! Open it now!" Quinn dropped to her knees beside the Alpha. Up close, his skin radiated furnace-level heat. "This is going to hurt," she said. Snatching her scalpel, she drove the thin blade directly into his smoking, ruined chest. Cade released an ear-splitting roar. His muscles locked tight, corded veins popping along his neck as elongated, razor-sharp fangs snapped down from his upper gums. Quinn bit her lip hard enough to taste copper, digging the blade deeper until it scraped against the buried slug. "Got it," she breathed. Clamping down with her forceps, she ripped the smoking bullet out of his flesh and chucked it across the room. The black sludge instantly flared bright red. Torn muscle fibers knitted together right before her eyes. Cade dragged in a ragged, starving breath. His golden eyes snapped open, wild and utterly primal. Moving faster than she could track, his burning hand shot upward, clamping around her waist. He hauled her crashing down against his rock-solid chest. Quinn gasped, slamming her hands against his shoulders to push away, but his grip held like a vice. He leaned his scarred face in, brushing his nose just below her ear, dragging in a deep lungful of her scent. A deep, vibrating rumble started in his chest, rattling straight through to her bones. Mine! The word vibrated directly against Quinn's collarbone. Mine. The world tilted on its axis. Quinn shoved her palms against his torso, meeting a wall of immovable, burning muscle. He smelled of violent storms, crushed pine, and fresh blood. A concussive boom violently rocked the concrete floor. Plaster rained from the fractured ceiling, coating her shoulders in white powder. The blast wave rattled her teeth. The Vanguard hunters had strapped C4 to her reinforced blast doors. Cade released her waist, rising to his full, towering height. His broad frame completely blocked out the emergency lights. "Hide!" he rumbled. Before she could scramble back, a second explosion tore through the alleyway. The steel security plates groaned, bending violently inward under the immense pressure. Dropping low to the sterile tiles, Quinn crawled behind the thick surgical counter. She dragged her medical bag with her, knuckles turning white around the canvas straps. Survival was the only option. Mia needed her alive to pay for school, and dying in this basement broke that promise. Acrid smoke leaked through the buckled steel, tasting like bitter pennies and burnt plastic. Above her, the emergency generator choked. The red security bulb flickered once and died. Total darkness swallowed the room. The only light left in the underground vault came from Cade's piercing golden eyes. He stood dead center in the rubble. The lethal silver poisoning was gone. Smooth, unbroken skin stretched over his ribs, where the blackened bullet hole had been just moments ago. Quinn gripped a surgical scalpel in her trembling fist. "Don't come out," Cade ordered, his voice slicing clean through the ringing in her ears. The hinges finally gave way. With an ear-splitting shriek of torn metal, the blast doors blew completely inward, letting the freezing rain and the hunters inside.
As the smoke cleared from the ruined doorway, fire rushed back into Cade's veins. The paralyzing venom vanished entirely. The ancient, primal bond had forcefully jump-started his cellular regeneration, knitting his torn muscle fibers back together in seconds. He dragged in a lungful of the freezing air. Beneath the stench of explosives, he caught the sharp, grounding scent of vanilla and human terror. Quinn. He would snap every spine in this city to keep her breathing. 3 armored boots hit the tile. The men stepping through the smoldering wreckage wore Vanguard tactical gear, racking silver-laced shotguns. His own elite guard. The betrayal burned hotter than the silver had. Cade let his elongated fangs drop past his bottom lip. He didn't want answers yet. He wanted blood. Releasing a guttural, bone-rattling roar, Cade launched himself through the clearing smoke. "There he is!" the lead man shouted, throwing his weapon up. He never got the chance to pull the trigger. Cade slammed into him like a freight train, gripping the steel barrel of the shotgun and shoving it forcefully toward the ceiling. Simultaneously, his free fist drove directly into the traitor's sternum. Ribs snapped with a sickening crunch. Cade spun, locking his glowing eyes onto the remaining 2 threats. Hesitation meant death. He grabbed the second guard by the tactical vest and launched him across the clinic. The man crashed backward through the glass medicine cabinet. Vials shattered, raining clear liquid and sharp shards onto the floor. A deafening blast ripped through the room. The third hunter fired. Silver buckshot missed Cade's temple by an inch, completely pulverizing the concrete wall behind him. Plaster dust plumed into the cold air. In the sudden, ringing quiet that followed the gunshot, Quinn let out a sharp gasp from behind the counter. That tiny sound of pure distress shattered Cade's remaining restraint. He closed the distance in a single stride, wrapping his hand around the shooter's throat. He squeezed until the shotgun clattered uselessly to the tiles. Cade dropped the lifeless body. He stood tall amid the wreckage, his chest heaving as the adrenaline slowly leveled out. Then, a metallic click echoed from the dark alleyway.
Crouched in the dusty shadows beneath her surgical counter, Quinn watched the carnage unfold. Bright arterial blood splattered across her pristine white cabinets. Cade dismantled fully trained armored killers with bare-handed, brutal efficiency. She spent her life stitching people together. He tore them apart without blinking. A fourth man silently stepped over the ruined steel doors. The new hunter raised a loaded silver crossbow, aiming the lethal tip directly at Cade's broad, exposed back. Cade was still staring down at the guard he just dropped. Quinn didn't think. She snatched the portable defibrillator off the bottom shelf. Yanking the paddles free, she cranked the battery dial to maximum output. The internal capacitor let out a high-pitched, escalating whine. Surging up from behind the counter, she sprinted across the slippery tiles. She slammed the charged metal plates firmly against the base of the hunter's thick neck. "Clear!" Quinn yelled. A blinding arc of raw electricity snapped through the man's nervous system. He convulsed violently, dropping like a stone to the floor. The crossbow misfired, burying a silver bolt deeply into the plaster ceiling. The thick smell of burnt hair and ozone flooded the room. Cade whipped around, dropping into a defensive crouch. His feral eyes tracked from the twitching body on the tiles, up to the buzzing paddles in Quinn's hands. She swallowed hard, forcing her chin up. "You're welcome." The lethal tension snapped. A dark, terrifying smirk pulled at the corner of Cade's blood-flecked mouth. "Grab your coat," he rumbled, his voice scraping against the quiet. We are leaving." Quinn stared at the dark, rainy alleyway beyond the broken doors. Staying meant waiting for the cops who worked for the wolves. Leaving meant stepping into the violent underworld of the apex predator standing in front of her. She kicked the crossbow away and grabbed her canvas medical bag. Stepping carefully around the shattered glass, she walked toward the Alpha. Cade locked his warm, solid hand firmly onto her waist, pulling her close to his side. Together they stepped out of the sterile clinic and vanished into the freezing rain.
The flooded asphalt of the warehouse district blurred into streaks of neon through the tinted windshield. Cade pinned the accelerator to the floorboards, forcing the SUV's V8 engine to scream as they tore out of the slums. He needed her off the streets, away from the blood and the wreckage. Inside the cab, the heater blasted dry, stale air over the dash. Beneath the hum of the tires, his ears easily picked up the frantic, rabbit-fast thud of Quinn's heart. Adding to the static in the air, a sharp scent of cracked ozone and ancient rust bled from her soaked canvas coat. Whatever silver pendant she carried hummed with a dangerous, dark voltage. The shadow leader hunting him kept lethal secrets. Cade gripped the leather steering wheel, grinding his molars. The fresh mating bond pulled tight across his ribs like a rusted iron chain, demanding he lock her away, where nothing could ever touch her. Snagging his encrypted burner phone from the console, he punched in a secure code. He issued blunt, rapid extraction orders to his remaining loyal guard, sending 50 armed men straight to a local college dorm. He refused to lose blood tonight. By the time the armored tires screeched onto the polished concrete of his underground parking garage, the icy downpour had stopped. The engine ticked softly as it cooled in the dim light. Cade guided Quinn toward a private, steel-plated elevator. The doors slid shut with a final ding, sealing them in a rising metal cage. Floor numbers flicked past in absolute silence. When the doors finally parted, Cold, sterile air rushed out to meet them. Quinn stepped slowly onto the black marble of the penthouse, surveying the sprawling, impenetrable fortress, exactly like a cornered stray mapping her escape routes.
The thick mahogany double doors clicked shut, trapping the noise of the city outside. Quinn stood perfectly still on the polished black floorboards. Floor-to-ceiling glass overlooked a glittering neon skyline, turning the silent penthouse into a terrifyingly beautiful cage. Her boots left damp smudges on the pristine rugs as she paced the perimeter. She hated the sterile scent of lemon polish. She hated the expensive white leather couches. Most of all, she hated the dangerous, magnetic pull, urging her to lean against the towering predator standing by the window. Before the adrenaline could fully crash, a sharp, rhythmic knock rattled the front entryway. The steel deadbolts snapped back automatically. Mia burst through the threshold, clutching a soaked backpack and looking completely feral with panic. Quinn! The canvas medical bag hit the floor. Quinn crossed the room in 2 long strides, catching her younger sister in a desperate, bone-crushing collision. She buried her face in Mia's damp hair, inhaling the familiar scent of cheap vanilla shampoo and rain. Cade stepped backward into the dim hallway, lighting giving them space, yet his golden eyes stayed locked on them, burning with quiet, lethal possession. Quinn forced her hands to stop shaking. She pushed Mia slightly behind her, squaring her shoulders to the alpha. The street rat survival instincts kicked in, building a thick professional wall of ice between them. "Thank you for the extraction," Quinn stated, her tone flat and blunt. "We will leave safely tomorrow morning." The quiet hum of the central heating seemed to stop entirely. Cade crossed the room slowly, his boots totally silent on the rugs. He stopped inches from her face, invading her space completely. The raw furnace heat radiating from his chest sent a violent, unwanted jolt straight down to her boots. "You aren't going anywhere," he rumbled softly. Harsh, white morning sunlight cut through the floor-to-ceiling windows, heating the black marble countertops. Quinn stood in the sprawling kitchen, grinding dark roast coffee beans while keeping her back to the glass. A sharp, sterile scalpel rested coolly against her forearm, strapped firmly beneath the long sleeve of her borrowed sweater. The penthouse felt peaceful. She knew it was a total lie. The brushed steel security panel suddenly chimed. "Grocery delivery!" A bored, static-laced voice crackled through the intercom speaker. Mia needed actual food, not just vending machine garbage. Quinn punched the release button, walked to the reinforced front door, and hauled a plain cardboard box inside from the hallway tile. Setting the carton onto the kitchen island, she grabbed a kitchen knife to slice the packing tape. The cardboard parted, and instantly the sharp scent of bitter almonds and corroded pennies hit her nose. Cade materialized from the hallway like a ghost. He didn't speak. He vaulted cleanly over the leather sofa, closing the distance in a terrifying blur of speed. His arm swung hard, backhanding the cardboard box completely off the counter. "Get back!" he roared. The carton struck the far wall, splitting open. A thick, grey cloud of toxic powder erupted into the sunlight. Quinn threw her arm over her face, stumbling backward as the dust settled over the polished floors. Wolfsbane mixed with crushed silver. A silent, lethal bomb sent straight past $1 million security system. The refrigerator hummed loudly in the ringing silence. Cade stared down at the toxic ash ruining the pristine rugs. His broad shoulders rose and fell in slow, calculated breaths. When he finally looked up at her, the golden rings around his pupils blazed with absolute, unrestrained murder. The Shadow Leader hadn't just sent a warning. He had kicked the front door wide open. Cade pulled his phone from his pocket, his thumb crushing the screen as he dialed. "Arm the borders," he whispered into the receiver. "We go to war."
Bones snapped. echoing sharply off the damp concrete walls of the underground boiler room. Cade stood over the metal folding chair, dragging his split knuckles across his jeans to wipe away the bright red blood. A single bare bulb swung from the ceiling wire, throwing shifting, ugly shadows over the battered Vanguard scout tied to the seat. The traitor spat a wad of dark blood onto the floor. Cade didn't blink. He grabbed the scout tightly by the throat, pulling him upward until the chair legs scraped the concrete. "Tell me who the shadow is," Cade rumbled, his voice scraping the bottom of his chest. The scout choked out a wet, bubbling laugh. "You're already dead, Alpha. He doesn't want your head on a spike." The man grinned through broken teeth. "He wants the human." The swinging bulb flickered, buzzing in the quiet. "Why?" Cade demanded, twisting the collar tight. "She touched the rock. She is the silver key." Cade dropped him. The metal chair slammed back down against the floor. A sharp spike of cold adrenaline pierced his focus. Silver key. He had read the ancient texts, but it was just a myth, a ghost story meant to scare pups. Stepping over the puddle of blood, Cade drove his boot straight into the scout's left kneecap. The scream tore completely through the basement. 10 minutes later, he had the armory coordinates. Cade turned his back on the wreckage and climbed the wooden stairs. The copper stench of torn flesh clung to his shirt, soaking straight through to his skin. He stopped at the top landing, staring at his ruined hands, knowing exactly what he had to show her next.
Fever smelled exactly like stale sweat and sour milk inside the darkened guest room. Quinn pressed her palm flat against Mia's burning forehead. Her sister thrashed under the silk sheets, teeth chattering through violently shaking jaws. The chronic infection was spiking fast, shutting down her frail immune system. She needed broad-spectrum antibiotics immediately. Trusting a pack of violent strangers with Mia's life was not an option. Pulling her canvas raincoat tight, Quinn slipped out the back service elevator and disappeared into the storm. Neon signs bled red and blue across the flooded asphalt of the South District. An hour later, clutching a plastic pharmacy bag bought with the last of her clinic cash, she ducked into a narrow brick alleyway to cut the distance back to the safe house. A low, wet snarl rolled out from the shadows ahead. Quinn froze. 3 wolves stepped into the amber glow of a street lamp. They were the size of luxury cars, wearing thick silver collars that cut directly into the fur around their throats. "Grab the human with the silver mark," the lead wolf barked, the words distorted by a monstrous, elongated jaw. The pharmacy bag slipped from Quinn's numb fingers, hitting the wet pavement with a crinkle. The lead beast lunged, snapping its teeth directly toward her neck. A dark blur plummeted from the fire escape above. Cade hit the asphalt, shedding his human skin before his boots struck the ground. Midnight fur burst through his tailored clothes, thick claws gouging deeply into the flooded street. Quinn scrambled backward, slipping into the cold mud. Cade didn't just fight them, he dismantled them. He sank his fangs into the leader's throat, violently tearing the silver collar and the windpipe completely free. Arterial spray painted the brick walls a bright, horrific red. The sickening crunch of a snapping spine drowned out the pouring rain. Quinn clamped her hands tightly over her ears, her stomach pitching as the last wolf hit the ground in pieces. Rain hissed against the hot blood pooling in the alley. Panting brutally, the giant midnight wolf stood over the carnage. He turned his broad head, locking glowing gold eyes onto Quinn, daring her to finally bolt.
The heater blew dry air over the dashboard, suffocated by the deafening silence inside the SUV cab. Cade locked his stiff fingers around the leather steering wheel. The wipers dragged rhythmically across the rain-slicked windshield, washing away the water. But the metallic tang of ripped flesh still clung to the upholstery. In the passenger seat, Quinn sat pulled into a tight knot against the door. She clutched the pharmacy bag to her chest like armor, staring blankly at the passing streetlights. He had exposed the beast. He had shown her the exact violence he was capable of, proving they belonged to completely different, incompatible worlds. The tires screeched as they hit the underground garage of the high-rise. Riding the elevator up, Cade didn't utter a single syllable. The doors parted. He walked straight past the expensive couches, stopping inches from the floor-to-ceiling glass. Below them, a million city lights flickered in the dark. A jagged slash across his ribs burned like battery acid. The silver from the trader's collar had carved deeply into his side, fighting his cellular healing. He stared at his own reflection in the glass, bracing for the inevitable sound of her packing her bags. Instead, the metal latch of a medical kit snapped open. Cade slowly turned his head. Quinn stood in the center of the Persian rug, holding a spool of black nylon thread and a curved needle. Her face was entirely drained of color, but her dark eyes locked onto his, completely unblinking. "Sit down on the couch," she ordered, her voice flat and steady. The floor dropped out from under him. Cade sank onto the leather cushions, staring as she stepped directly into his space. She smelled like rain and sweet vanilla, masking the stench of ozone. Pressing her cool, steady fingers against his burning chest, she braced her hand against the muscle. She drove the needle through his torn skin, pulling the thread tight, binding him to her with every single stitch.
The curved needle punched through the tough dermal layers with a wet, sickening pop. Quinn pulled the black nylon tight, securing the final knot over the ragged tear on Cade's side. Her pale fingers rested lightly against the burning heat of his chest. The quiet in the penthouse pressed in around them, broken only by the low hum of the central heating and the steady, drumbeat thud of his heart against her palm. He didn't pull away. Instead, he stared down at her, the feral gold rings in his eyes fading into an exhausted, bruised amber. "I was a stray," Cade rasped, his voice vibrating like a broken engine block, found freezing in the mountain snow. He didn't monologue. The words felt torn out of his throat. "The old alpha dragged me out of the ice, gave me a pack. He was the uncle they butchered in the dark." Cade shifted, the fresh stitches pulling tight. "I swore on his grave I wouldn't let another innocent die for my mistakes." Quinn wiped a smear of dried blood from her thumb. She knew the look of a cornered, starving animal. She had spent her life patching them up in dirty alleys, earning her scars the hard way. Reaching up, she pressed her palm flat against his rough, unshaven cheek. He leaned into the touch instantly, the tension draining out of his broad shoulders, like a man finding a fire in a blizzard. "You don't have to carry the whole underground alone," she murmured. The oxygen vanished from the space between them. Cade shifted his weight, tilting his head down until his nose brushed her jawline. The kiss hit her like a physical shock. It tasted of stale coffee, cold rain, and raw iron. Quinn grabbed the lapels of his ruined shirt, anchoring herself against his solid frame as the remaining adrenaline washed out of her system. For the first time since her clinic door shattered, the street rat's survival instincts finally powered down. She felt totally secure. Deep inside the digital circuitry of the penthouse security system, a silent red indicator light clicked on.
10 miles away, flames chewed through the corrupted steel of the Vanguard armory. Standing in the freezing downpour, Cade watched the illicit silver stash detonate. The concussive wave knocked the rain sideways, rattling his boots against the cracked asphalt of the shipping yard. Smoke plumed into the black sky. In the ringing quiet that followed the blast, hot ash rained down, melting instantly against his wet skin. He had crushed the toxic weapons, completely crippling the Shadow Leader's supply line. Still, a cold knot twisted violently below his ribs. The scout's dying words clawed at his focus. Silver Key. The rival faction wasn't just hunting the Alpha, they wanted the human. By torching this warehouse, Cade had just kicked the hornet's nest directly onto his own front porch. He slammed a fresh magazine into his sidearm, racking the metal slide. A violent vibration buzzed against his ribs. Snagging the encrypted burner phone from his soaked pocket, he pressed the plastic to his ear. "Alpha," his lead guard yelled over a storm of static. "The penthouse! We have a breach!" The air violently emptied from Cade's lungs. They overrode the service elevator. The guard choked out. Rapid gunfire echoing in the background. "Hunters are flooding the top floor." The line went dead. Pure, blinding panic locked its claws directly around Cade's throat. The impenetrable cage had just become a slaughterhouse. Sprinting toward the idling SUV, his boots pulverized the loose gravel. He ripped the driver's door open, throwing the armored vehicle into gear before his body fully hit the leather seat. He pinned the accelerator to the floorboards. Tires shrieked, burning rubber against the wet concrete as the engine roared past the red line. Rain turned to sleet, slashing aggressively against the windshield like thrown knives. If they spilled a single drop of her blood, he would turn this entire city into a graveyard.
The intrusion alarm didn't beep. It shrieked like a dying animal, flooding the living room, with a blinding, strobing, red light. Quinn vaulted off the leather couch, her boots hitting the Persian rug just as automatic gunfire shredded the drywall in the outer corridor. The acrid stench of burnt cordite and melted silver instantly poured through the HVAC vents. Street-forged survival instincts instantly overrode the sheer terror. She snatched her canvas medical bag from the coffee table, sprinting straight down the hall toward the guest room. Kicking the door open, she lunged for the mattress. "Mia, up!" Her sister bolted upright, eyes wide and completely unfocused. "Quinn?" Heavy boots thudded against the hardwood outside, accompanied by the metallic racking of shotguns. The corridor was fully compromised. Trapped on the 50th floor, Quinn's eyes darted wildly, landing on the large industrial air grate bolted near the ceiling. She didn't hesitate. Dragging an oak chair directly beneath the vent, she shoved her sister upward. "Climb!" Quinn ordered, her voice cracking. Fists pounded against the locked bedroom door. The wood splintered. Bracing her boot against the wall, Quinn kicked the aluminum grate violently. It popped free, clattering sharply against the floorboards. Mia scrambled into the dark, narrow ductwork, coughing on a thick cloud of disturbed dust. Quinn grabbed the metal ledge, hauling her torso into the freezing tunnel exactly as the bedroom door exploded inward. A tactical hunter stepped through the wreckage, leveling a silver-laced shotgun directly at her dangling boots. Kicking backward, on pure instinct, Quinn launched the heavy oak chair straight into the man's shins. He stumbled, throwing his aim wildly off-center. She yanked her legs inside just as the deafening blast tore through the room. Plaster and buckshot exploded into the wall inches below her feet. In the ringing silence of the tight metal box, Quinn scrambled furiously backward, pushing Mia deeper into the pitch-black maze. Screws dug into her knees. Claustrophobia crushed her chest, turning the freezing ventilation shaft into a suffocating coffin. 50 floors later, they reached the basement maintenance exhaust. Quinn kicked the exterior louver outward, dropping blindly onto the wet concrete of the back alleyway. Catching her crying sister by the arm, she dragged Mia toward the mouth of the street. They had escaped the gilded cage. But before their boots hit the sidewalk, had blinding halogen headlights switched on from the darkness. Tires screeched as an unmarked tactical van violently blocked the alley exit. The side panel slid open with a sharp, metallic clack.
Concrete rained from the burning sky, smashing onto the hood of the black SUV. Cade didn't tap the brakes. He drove the 3-ton armored vehicle straight over the curb and directly through the high-rise's reinforced glass lobby doors. The collision completely obliterated the entryway. Italian marble shattered under the heavy, spinning tires as the SUV tore into the ground floor. A high-pitched whistle cut through the roar of the engine. An incendiary rocket slammed directly into the passenger side panel. The concussive blast blew the 3-ton vehicle entirely onto its side, sending it scraping across the marble floor with a deafening, metallic shriek. Sparks rained down like fireworks. Black smoke instantly filled the crushed cab. Cade kicked the spider-webbed windshield completely out of its steel frame, dragging himself out of the burning wreckage. Blood poured from a gash across his forehead, stinging his eyes. The lobby of his impenetrable fortress was a burning war zone. Footsteps echoed softly over the crackle of the flames. A broad, scarred werewolf stepped out from behind a shattered reception desk, dragging a thick, silver-laced net across the debris. Cade inhaled sharply. The stench of rotting meat and wet earth hit the back of his throat. The rival Alpha, the shadow leader who ordered the alleyway ambush. "Looking for the human?" The Alpha sneered, his voice vibrating with twisted joy. Cade launched himself forward, a pure blur of feral, unstoppable violence. The rival Alpha swung the weighted net upward. The silver mesh caught Cade directly across his broad shoulders, dropping him hard to the cracked marble. The toxic metal instantly seared his flesh, burning straight through his soaked clothes and his supernatural healing. Before Cade could rip the net away, the rival Alpha pivoted, driving a heavy boot directly into the cracked, load-bearing pillar beside them. The structural concrete snapped. Tons of reinforced rebar and ceiling plaster collapsed directly onto Cade's back, pinning him flat against the bloody floor. Dust choked the air. The heavy weight crushed his lungs, forcing the breath out of him in a ragged wheeze. The silver bit deep into his exposed skin, sending paralyzing fire straight into his spinal cord. He dug his ruined fingers into the marble, trying to drag his crushed frame forward. The stone wouldn't budge. He was trapped under the ice. A sudden, blinding spike of raw panic lanced through his skull. The mating bond flared violently. Quinn! She was screaming silently in his head. The sheer terror of her fear etched directly into his nervous system.
The van doors slid open with a sharp, metallic clatter, exposing a wall of tactical body armor and silver-laced shotguns. Quinn's blood turned to ice water. She shoved her hand deep into her canvas pocket, fingers locking around the handles of 3 sterile scalpels. "Run, Mia!" Quinn threw the surgical steel blindly into the dark. A tactical hunter roared in pain as a blade sank deeply into the junction of his shoulder and neck. Snatching Mia by the wrist, Quinn pivoted sharply, sprinting headlong down the flooded alleyway. They tore through the freezing downpour, boots splashing wildly through deep, oil-slicked puddles. Behind them, heavy combat boots hit the pavement, accompanied by the terrifying shuck-shuck of shotguns racking rounds. Quinn's lungs burned, tasting strongly of rust and copper. At the end of the alley, the rusted, chain-link gates of a condemned subway entrance loomed in the dark. Quinn slammed her shoulder into the metal, forcing the rusted hinges backward. They tumbled past the gate, plunging into the pitch-black concrete stairwell. Mia's boot caught on a piece of jagged rebar. A sickening snap echoed sharply off the tunnel walls. "My ankle!" Mia screamed, collapsing hard onto the wet concrete. Quinn dropped to her knees, running her hands desperately over Mia's leg. The bone jutted sharply against the cold skin. A severe compound fracture. She couldn't stitch this. She couldn't slap a bandage on it and force her to run. Her hyper-independence shattered completely. Grabbing Mia under the arms, Quinn dragged her sister backward, hiding them behind a thick, rotting concrete pillar near the abandoned tracks. Unsweeping flashlight beams cut through the darkness at the top of the stairwell. Check the tracks. A rough voice echoed down the tunnel. Quinn pulled Mia tight against her chest, pressing her back flat against the freezing concrete. The boots were coming down the stairs. Stagnant water dripped steadily from the cracked tunnel ceiling, echoing softly in the suffocating darkness. Quinn crouched in the wet mud, holding her hand firmly over Mia's mouth to muffle her jagged, panicked breathing. 3 heavily armed vanguard hunters stepped off the bottom stair, boots crunching loudly on the old ballast gravel. Bright halogen flashlight beams swept methodically over the rusted train cars and broken concrete. The white light passed directly over them, catching the reflective strip of Mia's backpack. Found them, the lead hunter stated flatly. The street rat's survival instincts finally short-circuited. Quinn had fought off gang members for her clinic cash, taken beatings to keep her sister fed, and built a wall of absolute isolation to protect them both. But a scalpel couldn't stop 3 supernatural killers armed with buckshot. Trying to survive completely alone only got you killed in the dark. Heavy boots crunched closer, stopping just a few feet from their pillar. Quinn looked down at the final sharp scalpel, gripped tightly in her white-knuckled fist. She slowly opened her fingers. The steel blade clattered uselessly onto the wet concrete. She closed her eyes, entirely surrendering her stubborn, foolish pride. She reached deep into her chest, blindly grabbing the warm, pulsing tether of the mating bond. Cade. She shoved every ounce of her terror and desperate need directly down the tether. I need you. 3 shotguns racked simultaneously, the metallic sound echoing loudly in the damp tunnel. Step out, human, the lead hunter ordered. Quinn held her breath. They staring down the barrels of the silver-laced weapons. The deep subway tunnel felt exactly like a frozen tomb. A low, deep vibration began to hum through the soles of Quinn's boots. It started as a subtle tremor, shaking loose gravel from the rusted tracks. It rapidly escalated into a massive, earth-shattering roar, vibrating so violently it shook the dust entirely off the tunnel ceiling. A primal, terrifying howl echoed down the concrete stairs.
Crushed plaster choked the air, settling in a thick layer over the pulverized lobby. Cade lay pinned beneath tons of load-bearing concrete. The silver mesh melted straight through his skin, boiling his spinal fluid and paralyzing his limbs in a cage of toxic fire. Every breath scraped his lungs like shattered glass. Then, the psychic scream hit him like a physical blow. Cade! Quinn's raw, unfiltered terror bled through the mating bond, acting like a brutal surge of electricity straight to his dying heart. The paralyzing ice of the silver venom vanished, instantly replaced by a violent, cellular fire. He didn't just feel her fear, he felt her absolute demand for him to rise. He dug his ruined fingers into the cracked marble. His muscles tore, knitting together and tearing again as his supernatural regeneration violently fought the toxic metal. He dragged a jagged lungful of dust into his chest. Releasing a deafening, chest-rattling roar, Cade shoved his forearms up against the rubble. Rebar groaned. Concrete fractured. He threw the structural pillar completely off his back, sending huge chunks of debris crashing across the lobby floor. He tore the melted mesh from his shoulders, dropping the smoking metal to the tiles. In the ringing quiet that followed, the rival Alpha was nowhere to be seen. The coward had run. Cade's eyes burned with blinding, lethal gold. He projected a single, brutal command into the pack network, an absolute demand for war. By the time his boots hit the flooded street outside, 50 vanguard wolves waited in the freezing downpour, their eyes glowing in the dark. The slaughter was officially green-lit.
The rusted shipping doors slammed shut with a concussive bang, trapping the roar of the storm outside. Rough hands shoved Quinn forward, sending her crashing hard onto the oil-stained concrete of the warehouse floor. She tasted dirt and old copper. The cavernous room smelled of wet rot, oxidized iron, and damp decay. Thick industrial zip ties bound her wrists behind her back, biting so deeply into her flesh that her fingers had already gone totally numb. In the dark corner, Mia curled into a tight ball, trembling in absolute silence over her fractured ankle. The scarred rival Alpha circled Quinn, his steel-toed boots clicking rhythmically against the wet cement. "You are nothing but bait," the man sneered, his breath carrying the stench of stale blood and raw meat. "The silver key is mine." Quinn stared blankly ahead, letting her shoulders slump in total defeat. Out of sight, her bloodless fingers slipped inside her canvas sleeve, gripping the sterile steel scalpel she had hidden before fleeing the penthouse. Slicing a plastic lock by touch was basic anatomy. She didn't argue. She didn't beg. She worked the razor-sharp blade methodically, back and forth, and against the thick plastic binding. The rival Alpha turned his back, barking tactical orders to the guards watching the perimeter doors. The zip ties snapped with a faint, inaudible click. Quinn kept her arms crossed tightly behind her, maintaining the perfect illusion of a broken hostage. She gripped the scalpel, a coiled snake waiting for a throat to step within striking distance. Suddenly, the exterior perimeter alarms began to shriek. Strobe lights bathed the cracked brick walls in violent, flashing red. The predator had finally arrived.
The steel perimeter gates of the shipping yard exploded inward in a shower of white-hot sparks. Cade vaulted through the clearing smoke, moving with unhinged, apocalyptic velocity. 50 loyal vanguard wolves flooded the flooded asphalt right behind him, colliding with the rival pack in a brutal, deafening wave of teeth and claws. Gunpowder and wet fur choked the freezing air. Cade didn't slow down to fight. He simply eradicated anything blocking his path. When an armored guard swung a silver machete at his chest, Cade snapped the man's forearm backward, launching the screaming body through a stack of wooden crates. Splintered wood rained down on the wet pavement. Cade stepped over the wreckage, his boots stopping directly in front of the rusted loading dock doors. Rain washed the fresh gore from his knuckles. Beneath the stench of copper and burnt cordite, his nose caught a sharp, distinct trace of sweet vanilla, mixed with adrenaline-spiked terror. Quinn. He didn't search for a handle. He drove his heel directly into the center of the reinforced steel. The double doors tore clean off their rusted hinges, flying into the warehouse with a deafening crash. Fluorescent light spilled out into the storm. Standing dead center in the cavernous room, the scarred rival Alpha gripped Quinn tightly by the hair, pressing a jagged silver blade directly against her carotid artery. Cade bared his fangs, the feral gold in his eyes locking instantly onto his final target.
The silver edge bit into Quinn's throat. A single drop of warm blood tracked down her collarbone, stinging against the freezing metal. Bootsteps echoed off the concrete. Slow, methodical. Cade stepped into the blinding warehouse lights. Dust drifted around his broad shoulders. He didn't roar, and he didn't bare his teeth. He just stared at the rival Alpha with flat, dead eyes. Fear never touched her. A different kind of adrenaline flooded her veins, sharp, clear, and focused. A wet, barking laugh ripped from the rival. The blade pressed harder against her skin. "Drop to your knees, Vanguard King, or the human bleeds out," the monster shouted. His grip on her collar felt iron tight, completely distracted by the threat standing across the room. He forgot the cardinal rule of the streets. You never turn your back on a cornered animal. And Quinn remembered the old street surgeon's advice. Cut the rot before it knows the knife is there. She didn't hesitate. Her free right hand slipped into her pocket. Metal flashed under the halogens. She drove the sterile scalpel straight into the meat of the rival's thigh. He shrieked. The pitch tore through the cavernous room, echoing off the steel beams. The silver blade slipped from his grasp, clattering sharply onto the cement. Quinn twisted out of his grip, scrambling backward, until her boots hit a stack of wooden pallets. She swallowed hard, tasting copper and old dust, while the ringing in her ears leveled out. A blur of dark fur and raw muscle crossed the floor. Cade didn't give the bastard time to pull the scalpel. He wrapped one enormous hand around the rival's throat, hoisting him completely off the ground. Sea boots kicked uselessly at empty air. Silence crashed back down into the room. The only sound was the rival choking on his own spit. "You touched my mate," Cade said. He didn't yell. The low, lethal pitch vibrated through the soles of Quinn's shoes. A sickening crack split the quiet. The rival collapsed in a heap of broken bones. Dust motes swirled wildly in the violent aftermath. Quinn braced her hands against her knees, sucking in damp air, watching the shadow leader bleed out on the floor.
The stink of ruptured glands and fresh death settled over the warehouse, lingering in the damp air. Boot heels pounded against the pavement outside before 50 Vanguard soldiers breached the loading docks, fanning out across the concrete floor. Weapons lowered. Eyes shifted from the broken corpse to Cade. One by one, they dropped to the floor, bowing their heads in total submission. Cade barely registered the movement. The crown meant nothing right now, and the Empire could wait. His focus locked onto the pale woman leaning against the far wall. He tossed his blood-slicked combat knife onto a nearby crate. The metal clanged loudly, but Cade was already moving. He crossed the distance, dropping to his knees on the filthy floor right in front of her. The violent hum beneath his skin vanished, replaced by a cold, sharp dread. He reached out. His fingers hovered inches from her cheek, shaking with adrenaline. "Are you hurt?" The words scraped his throat, stripped of all power. Quinn took a ragged breath. She wiped a streak of dirt from her jaw. "I'm okay." "You came." A fractured piece of his chest snapped back into place. After years of hollow exile, the bitter ice inside him finally thawed. He looked at the grease on her forehead, the fierce light in her eyes, and knew he was home. His thumb brushed a speck of dried blood from her cheekbone. He leaned forward, burying his face against her stomach. He closed his eyes, forcing his lungs to fill with the scent of vanilla and rain, until his pulse finally slowed. She sank her fingers into his hair. The warehouse noise faded to a dull hum. "Mia," Quinn whispered, her voice rough. Cade lifted his head. He spotted the little sister huddled in the shadows, gripping her knee. He barked an order over his shoulder. 2 medics broke from the pack and rushed toward the corner. Standing up, Cade hooked his arms under Quinn, lifting her completely off the ground. She tucked her head beneath his chin. He carried her past the kneeling soldiers and out through the shattered bay doors. Freezing rain hit his face, washing away the stench of the warehouse. Her heartbeat drummed steadily against his chest, warning the world she was finally his.
Winter rain gave way to the sweltering heat of a June morning. 6 months after the warehouse floor had been scrubbed clean, sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Vanguard penthouse. Quinn blinked awake against the glare. She stretched her legs under the silk sheets, listening to the muffled roar of city traffic miles below. A warm arm banded across her stomach. Cade hauled her backward, pressing her against his chest. His skin smelled like pine and clean cotton, burying the lingering ghosts of the streets forever. The shadow war was a dead memory. Across the room, the glowing silver key sat locked inside a reinforced glass case. A silent guardian, proving Cade ruled the city packs. A low rumble vibrated behind her shoulders. Cade opened his eyes, the gold irises catching the morning light. His gaze pinned her to the mattress. A sudden dangerous heat pooled low in her stomach. She used to think isolation kept her safe. She spent years boarding up her chest, trusting no one but herself to survive. Now, staring at the scarred chest of the man who tore down those walls, she knew real strength lived in the pack. Quinn twisted around. She grabbed the collar of his sleep shirt and pulled him in. The kiss started slow. It didn't stay that way. A dark growl rattled his ribcage. He rolled her onto the mattress, pinning her wrist gently above her head. Her pulse hammered against her throat. Time slowed to a crawl as his mouth dragged down the side of her neck, hitting a pulse point that made her arch off the bed. His hands charted the curve of her waist, rough calluses dragging against smooth skin. The bond snapped tight between them, raw fire and blood logic. Once she had feared the monster lurking beneath his skin. Today she welcomed the predator. Their fingers laced together against the pillows. She stared up into his gold eyes, fully prepared to tear the world apart for him. Quinn's fierce hyper-independence is a pure trauma response, and Cade's entire arc is about proving she doesn't have to carry the weight of survival on her own. It's genuinely terrifying to let a partner fight for you when you've only ever been able to rely on yourself. Let me know in the comments below if you relate to Quinn's struggle to finally drop her defenses and trust her mate.